Good morning, Chairman.
Good morning and welcome to this virtual meeting of the Overview and Scrutiny Management Board. My name is Councillor Robert Parker and I'm Chair of the Board. Can I begin by welcoming all members and officers in attendance today? The audio feed of this meeting is being broadcast via the County Council's website. I'd also like to welcome members of the press and public who may be listening to our meeting today. Anyone invited to speak during today's meeting should unmute their microphone and switch on their camera. Could you turn off your camera and microphone when not taking part? We will today be conducting a roll call voting for the minutes, councillor call for action and the pre-decision scrutiny item, which are agenda items number 3, number 6 and number 7. The rest will be agreed or not by dissent using the chat function. If you want to speak, please use the chat function and type speak as a comment. All officers and members are welcome to use the chat function. Requests to speak will be collated by the Vice Chair, Councillor Ray Wotton, and Nigel West, Head of Democratic Services and Statutory Scrutiny Officer. He will indicate in the chat when a new item has begun. If you experience any IT issues during the meeting, please end the call using the red phone icon and rejoin the meeting using the link previously provided. If you do experience connectivity issues while speaking, can you turn your camera off, as this may help? If you continue to experience IT issues, then can you contact Simon Firth, the IT engineer? Can I also ask that members who are intending to leave the meeting early or are returning to the meeting indicate using the chat function? Officers don't need to do that. Okay. Can we now turn to the order of proceedings? Can I begin by asking Nick Harrison, the Democratic Services Officer, to confirm the presence of all members in attendance at the meeting?
Thank you, Chairman. Councillor Wotton.
Present.
Councillor Mrs. Boquet.
Present.
Councillor Mrs. Brockway.
Present.
Councillor Kendrick.
Present.
Councillor Macy.
Present.
Councillor Marfleet.
Present.
Councillor Mrs. Newton.
Present.
Councillor Pepper.
Present.
Councillor Rowe.
Present.
Councillor Mrs. Machin. Reverend Philip Johnson. Okay, thank you. Reverend Philip Johnson. Okay, and we might have Councillor Hill.
Yes, can I give my, I've had a meeting, it's Councillor Whittington here. I've had a phone call from Councillor Hill about 15 minutes ago. He's got to do something first thing, but he hopes to attend the meeting a little bit later. Thanks, Nick.
Thank you. Councillor Boothroyd. Obviously, we've got Councillor Whittington, Councillor Perrotton-Williams, Councillor Corey. Okay, that's it. Thanks, Chairman.
Could I just go back and ask whether you mentioned one of our added members, Alex Sayer?
I didn't, Chairman. She's given her apologies. I was going to mention that when we get to the apologies part.
Thank you very much. Okay, if we move to the agenda, item 1, apologies for absence. Nick, apologies.
We've got apologies from Councillor Strangle, Councillor Young, Councillor Rowe is deputising for Councillor Adams, and we've got apologies from Ms. Alex Sayer.
That's great. Okay, thank you. If we move to agenda item 2, declarations of councillors' interest. If you've got an interest, can you indicate in the chat room now by saying speak and tell us about the interest and in which item?
Chairman, I've got a request to speak from Councillor Stephen Rowe.
Okay, Councillor Rowe.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I need to express an interest in 9 and 10. It's a financial interest, so I will leave after item 8 and not return. Thank you.
Thank you for that. Thank you. Okay, so if we move to item 3, minutes of the meeting of the Overview and Scrutiny Management Board, our last meeting held on the 17th of December. That starts on page 5. In accordance with the usual practice, I'll go through this a page at a time. If anybody wants to raise an item in relation to the accuracy only of the minutes, please indicate. So if we start with page 5, Any comments? Page 6, page 7, page 8, page 9, page 10, page 11, page 12, page 13, and then finally page 14. Okay, so can we confirm the minutes of this meeting, and do I have a proposer and a seconder for us to receive these minutes?
Yes, Chairman, I have to propose that these minutes are correct.
Thank you.
Chairman, Councillor Macy.
Councillor Macy, thank you. Thank you, Councillor Watton and Councillor Macy. So we'll now vote on the minutes. What we're voting on, as we know from all our past experience, do we agree that the minutes are a correct record? Nick will call out the name of each member present in alphabetical order, and you're asked to say for, against, or abstain. Over to you, Nick.
Thank you, Chairman. Councillor Mrs. Boquet.
For.
Councillor Mrs. Brockway.
For.
Councillor Kendrick.
For.
Councillor Macy.
For.
Councillor Marfleet.
For.
Councillor Mrs. Newton.
For.
Councillor Parker.
For.
Councillor Pepper.
For.
Councillor Wootton.
For.
Ms. Alexander Sayer.
I think she sent her apologies, Nick.
Okay, thank you. That's carried, Chairman.
Thank you. Thank you. Therefore, the minutes are agreed. Okay, if we move on now to announcements by anybody who wants to make any announcements. Can I begin with the Chair's announcements? I attended a meeting of the Executive on the 5th of January and presented the comments from the Overview and Scrutiny Management Board on the final report from the Developer Contribution Scrutiny Review. It's clear the Executive welcomed the report and its recommendations and did conclude that the report had provided the basis for a series of activities on developer contributions. An action plan will now be compiled to indicate which recommendations have been accepted and how the issues raised will be addressed. The board will be receiving the Executive Response Action Plan at its meeting on the 17th of March. Can I thank again Councillor Linda Wootton and the Scrutiny Panel A for turning this review round so quickly. Separately, an informal briefing session on the Transformation Programme has been arranged for the board for the 10th of February from 9:30 to 11 a.m. An appointment will be sent out to members of the board after this meeting. So that's my announcements. Is there anyone else? For example, Councillor Hill's not here, but Councillor Whittington on Councillor Hill's behalf, or any other executive councillors or chief officers. Anybody want to make any announcements to our meeting?
Mr. Chairman, it's Councillor Whittington. I've not been given any notification by Councillor Hill of anything specific that he wants to say before the meeting. Obviously, as we're discussing, some of the budget for next year, he hopes to be in attendance at that point, and obviously may wish to make some comments at that point. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you. Chief officers, Debbie, Andrew, for example. Yeah, anything that you want to bring to us?
Thank you. I've got nothing to add, Councillor Parker.
Thank you. Andrew?
Nothing from me either, Councillor Parker, but here to support the budget questions and debate later.
Okay, James?
No, nothing from me either, Councillor Parker, thank you.
Okay, that's fine. If we could move on then. Item 5, consideration of call-ins. Nick, have we got any call-ins to consider?
None received, Chairman.
Thank you. Item 6, which is an item that's not come before us before in relation to the nature of it, which is a councillor call for action. What we have is an item where we invite the board to consider a councillor call for action request submitted by Councillor Ray Wharton on the 31st of December in relation to an issue on West Street in Barkston. The councillor call for action request was validated by Debbie Barnes, the Chief Executive, on the 4th of January. I'd like to invite Councillor Ray Wootton to outline his reasons for the Council call for action and what actions he would like to see taken to address the issue. We've also got in attendance senior members of the Highways Department, Karen Cassar, Assistant Director Highways, Chris Miller, Team Leader of Countryside Services, Rowan Smith, Local Highways Manager West, and Jan Gibson, Programme Leader for Minor Works and Traffic. So, just a small point, Councillor Wootton will be advocating this argument, therefore he won't be taking part in the discussion and voting. So, Councillor Wootton is going to present his Council call for action and talk through a short slide. Over to you, Councillor Wootton.
Yes, thank you very much indeed, Mr. Chairman. May I start by thanking those who supported my calls for action request. Mr. Chairman, I have not done this lightly, but with determination that a solution can be found to resolve this long-standing complaint as soon as possible after exhausting all other avenues. Taking action that will help the farmer, Mr. Elnor, and local residents, but also assist those who wish to visit and walk in this attractive part of Lincolnshire. Mr. Chairman, you will see that I have the support for this calls for action process. Since submitting this, Barkston and Sizedon Parish Council have met and supported this call 100%. This action has also been supported by 6 local residents who live in West Street. The complainant, Mr. Steve Elnor, owns Mill Farm, which is located at the end of West Street, Barkston, where generations of his family have lived since the 1930s. West Street is a small country lane leading to Mr. Elnor's farm and is a dead end. Mr. Elnor has repeatedly had his route obstructed by parked vehicles when using his farm equipment over the past few years, and has seen since March at the start of the COVID-19 pandemic increasing numbers of traffic parking either obstructing his route or damaging the roadside verge. Mr. Elnor is at his wit's end and is hoping LCC can help. You can see by the photographs, Tracy, if I could ask you to put them up, please. Tracy?
Very moment, I'm just loading it for you.
Thank you.
Okay, can you see that okay?
Yes, I can. Thank you. Go to slide 1, please. Yes, slide 1. Members of the committee, this is a passing place which Mr. Elnor actually had to pay to have installed to his farm on a planning application many years ago. You can see people are parking in that parking space. On the right-hand side, you can see the outline of his tractor, which is driving along, and the vehicles which are parking on the left-hand side of the road. Slide 2, please, Tracy. You can see the vehicles there are parked on the verge and causing extreme damage to the verge. Slide 3, please, Tracy. This is the view from Mr. Elnor's tractor, a very narrow single-track country lane. This is a small tractor. He can't get his larger vehicles along this lane when vehicles are parked, obstructing his route. Next slide, please. Okay, you see on here, on the right-hand side, there are some marker posts which are lawfully regulated, of which Mr. Elnor has put in himself, and you can see some of the damage to the curb. On the next slide, Tracy, this is the verge as it is at the moment. Number of vehicles have been stuck on this verge, and they've had to be pulled out by tractors. And not a very nice sight, and this needs sorting out. Thank you, Tracy. The government and this authority has encouraged members of the public to take exercise. People are being drawn to this area by word of mouth and on social media to walk along the adjacent drift lane, which is subject to a Section 34 Highways Act 1988 vehicle restriction, to the River Witham. where walkers can cross by stepping stones, so an attractive location to visit even on a winter's day. Mr. Elnor, at his own expense, fitted authority-approved posts to discourage parking at the suggestion of the local police. But still visitors block his entry and exit. Although not legally approved, Mr. Elnor was desperate for his access not to be blocked. Even during total lockdown, people were still coming and parking outside his farm entrance. LCC Countryside Officer Chris Miller had visited this site along with myself and Highways Manager Rowan Smith, but on different occasions. Since submitting this call for action, the favoured solution by those that have contacted me is to create a parking space for 6 vehicles. This could be achieved by placing GR14 grass reinforcement and PP50 permeable paving or anchored ground reinforcement grips at a lower cost than tarmac parking bays. Another resident contacted me and disagreed, stating that it could attract unsavoury types during the hours of darkness. However, he did suggest that approved barriers or bollards could be fitted. And finally, Mr. Chairman, it is clear that a solution needs to be found, and I request that this committee support my call for action and ask the Highways Committee to find a solution for my residents' concerns as soon as possible. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Ray. Before I open it up to questions from members of the OSMB, would any of the officers present like to speak on the officer response provided in the report, or add anything that we might find helpful?
Sorry, Chairman, I was just struggling to unmute then. We've got the officers here today, and I'm just going to hand over to Chris Miller just to provide a response to the call for action, and just to say that the Highways and Countryside teams have worked collaboratively to put this response together. So I'd just like to hand over to Chris just to talk through from the officers' perspective.
Thank you, Karen. Over to you, Chris.
Thank you, Chairman. Yes, as Councillor Wootton's pointed out, the attraction of this location is the continued opportunity to take a exercise through lockdown, and it has occasioned people to travel out there to then use the bridleway network that's nearby. There's probably not a great deal we can do to stop that activity happening. It's whether or not there are opportunities to regulate how they access the area, to which myself and my colleagues in Highways have discussed and looked at the practical and the legal. As Councillor Wootton has stated, the bollards that have been erected by Mr. Elner, whilst perhaps having some effect, aren't legitimate features of the highway network. And I believe the main concerns, in speaking with Mr. Elner previously, was the parking, particularly in the lay-by elements of the road, although the verge parking is also causing him some concern. The difficulty is, of course, finding solutions which are both practical and affordable at this current time. And to date, we've been at something of an impasse of finding an appropriate solution in that regard. Councillor Wootton has mentioned the Road Traffic Act Section 34 notices, which were placed on the bridleway sections to reduce the amount of illegal vehicle access that was happening across the bridleways. But of course, that might just be pushing people further back onto the road, which is now causing a problem. And again, the danger would be that any restrictions on that section of road may push them further back into Barkston, where there are a greater number of residences, which may cause a problem to them and their parking. But that's probably all I can add at this time, Chairman. Thank you.
Thank you, Chris. Karen, is there any other officer that you want to ask to speak as well?
I think Rowan could add some context to the conversation as well. Rowan, if you'd like to just speak as well, please.
Thank you.
Yes, good morning. Thank you, Karen. Good morning, Chairman, and everybody. I'll sort of echo what Chris has said, really. At this point in time, there's certainly no budget involved in for anything such as parking areas and anything like that. We've allowed temporarily for the marker post to be put in that Mr. Elner has put in. He's also put up a sign as well asking people not to park in the passing places, which we're letting go at the minute in terms of what that is until we can possibly try and agree a solution. That's what we'd like to leave at the minute in place until we can see if there is a solution that we can take forward. But nothing much more to add to what Chris has said, to be perfectly honest.
Okay, fine. Thank you for that. We haven't got a political representative in the sense of Councillor Hill as leader or Councillor Perrotton Williams. So if we then move on to members of the board who want to ask questions to Councillor Wootton or to ask any questions of officers. Do we have anybody indicating to speak, Nigel?
Yes, Chairman. We have Councillor Brockway, Councillor Newton and Councillor Kendrick.
Fine. Councillor Brockway first. Over to you, Jackie.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Chairman. It seems to me that the fundamental problem here is the farmer being able to do his job. When we're a farming community and this man must be able to carry out his work. So the villages to me are a secondary issue. Okay, it's not pleasant, but the prime thing is the farmer. And he's got to be able to have access. And I wonder, is there any way we can change the designation of this road? Are we enabled under highways regulations at all to make it pedestrians only past a certain point? Is there any way there could be retractable bollards to stop people going past there? I don't believe that we can't find a way to let this man get in and out. Could we widen the road? I mean, there are solutions that we haven't mentioned here. The thing is, there is cost, but making it pedestrians only, if that sort of thing is allowed, would be cheap. I think fundamentally we must find a solution. We can't let this go. I absolutely support Councillor Wootton's call for action here. It's the right thing to do. So I think we need to go away from this meeting with some sort of idea of how we can take it forward, rather than saying we haven't found anything at the moment. There will be a way. So what about those things I've just mentioned? Are we allowed to do things like no cars or lorries past this point, retractable bollards, pedestrians only? Are any of those things viable, or am I pie in the sky there?
Could I, before the officers answer, if I could remind everybody that we are here to say whether or not we think there is a sufficient case for it to go to Highways, the Highways Scrutiny Committee, to do what I'm going to call a proper job. So we're looking for sufficiency in the argument put forward by Councillor Wootton for us to pass it on to Highways Scrutiny Committee. Yes, I'm sure the officers will answer the question, but it's our views about the strength of the calling as the first stage in validating it before it goes to Highways, and those questions and the solutions are Highways world. Okay, I just wanted to make that clear.
Thank you, Jim.
Karen, how would your officers answer that the point made by Jackie?
I'd just at this point like to bring in Shan Gibson, who has a greater understanding of the regulations from a traffic and movement perspective. Jan, are you available?
Yes. Okay. Good morning. Yeah, we've been down and looked at this site from the point of view of both the installation of potential parking areas and mitigation of access. In terms of the parking areas, we estimate a cost of about, for 6 spaces, about between £30,000 and £40,000. Now that would be to create a metalled surface. But we did by chance come across Mr. Elnor on that visit, and we did suggest to him that perhaps the ditch should be cleaned out, because the ditch is completely full of water. It hasn't been cleaned out for many years, so the water is standing in the verge and exacerbating the problems that we've seen on the photographs. And also, we would feel that we wouldn't want to do any civils works unless that drainage issue was sorted, and that would be the responsibility of the adjacent landowner in this case. Apart from that, we've looked at various issues to restrict traffic, but I don't believe that's the aim of Councillor Wootton at this time. I think he wants to facilitate some vehicles being able to park safely on the highway and to allow people to visit the area and not impact on parking within the village. So we've looked at various potential TRO issues, all of which would prevent access for anybody except if they needed access to premises along the roads. And I don't believe that's what is requested here, and also would be problematic in itself in terms of maintenance and impact on the village in terms of putting more vehicles and parking in on West Street. We could potentially look at removing parking adjacent to the passing bays to protect those with maybe double yellow lines. But again, enforcement would have to come from another area. We'd have to take away enforcement from another area such as Grantham in order to be able to effectively enforce that. I'm not sure about the legalities of downgrading the route to pedestrians only, but again, I'm not sure that's what's required in terms of, we don't want to restrict people visiting the area, we want to try and facilitate it. That's my position at the minute.
Okay. Can I just make a request to either Karen or yourself? If we decide at the end of our debate to agree that it should go to the Highway Scrutiny Committee, then one of the other things that we're asked to do is to provide advice, to the Highway Scrutiny Committee following our deliberations. In other words, we don't want our contribution to be wasted. So, but perhaps while the next questions are asked, officers might like to think about potential advice to us on what advice we'd give to highways and transport scrutiny. So that's just something to reflect on while the next speaker, Councillor Newton.
Thank you, Chairman. I'm minded to support Councillor Wootton here. I think, and what Councillor Brockway said, because the farmer must be able to go about his daily business. But at the same time, we need to encourage people to come into our areas, particularly local people who it might be too far to walk. So I think we need to find a solution. But I wondered what Councillor Wootton's preferred, what option does he think would work best in that area?
Chairman, thank you. Thank you very much indeed. Thank you, Angela, for your comment. I think the most popular solution is the creation of 6 parking bays. But obviously, you've got the cost to consider there. Secondly, would be to move the Section 34 highway sign to the end of the village that goes into the narrow access road to his farm. Move it down there so that only residents only could go take their vehicles down there. It wouldn't stop people walking down there, but it would actually help.
Thank you. Thank you, Chairman.
Thank you. Councillor Kendrick.
Thank you, Chairman. Actually, some of the points or questions I was going to ask have been asked by Councillor Brockway. The only question is, it was mentioned, I think, in Councillor Wootton's presentation, a different form of road surface, apart from a metalled road surface. I think he mentioned matting of some kind. I'm assuming that would be at a much lower cost than metalled road. And to finish, yes, I too would support this going forward to the committee. Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you. Nigel, do we have any more speakers?
Yes, Chairman, we have Councillor Rowe and Councillor Marfleet.
Thank you. Councillor Rowe.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'd just like to support Councillor Wootton's request for this to go before the Highways and Transport Scrutiny Committee. I think it's the right place to be, and it's something we should be looking at. Thank you.
Fine. Hugo. Councillor Marfleet, Hugo.
Morning, Chairman. This is an interesting one because I have loads of single back roads that get trashed and their verges trashed and eroded. I agree with this in a sense, but I actually think it would be better to, in effect, send this and, in effect, to look at verges as a whole by the Highways Committee, especially in relation to single track roads, and see if there is better ways and solutions that we can do. Because the problem is that this isn't in the budget, it's not scoped. And I can think of quite a few in my area. So I agree something needs doing. We haven't really got it budgeted. The financial aspect, 30,000 to park 6 cars is somewhat, might be quite extravagant, I would say. And I think in real sense, we should look at this perhaps with a more holistic approach on verges and what we can offer as a solution potentially for here. If I was a farmer and somebody blocked me, I think I'd be soon getting my tractor out and moving his car and tell him to sling his hook. But I do think that the verges, certainly in my area, we have issues with, and I think I would like to sort of just put that Highways actually looks at the verges as a whole, and this is an example of why they should look at verges, to perhaps come out with a sort of a policy, or certainly look at sort of ways in which we can support our communities, because by God, I don't half get hassles with verges and the decay of verges and all the issues that go with it. And I'd like to see a much more sort of an approach where we've at least looked at it and weighed up the actual implications and financial implications.
I think that's a very good point, Hugo. Thank you for that.
Thank you.
Any other member of the committee want to speak?
Yes, Chairman. I have Councillor Pepper.
Nigel, over to you.
Yeah, thank you, Chairman. Just to say at the outset, I fully support Councillor Wootton in this going to the Highways Scrutiny Committee. I note that the farmer provided a lay-by previously at his own expense. Now, I'm not suggesting at 1 minute that he should pay for another one, but there has to be a cheaper solution, as Councillor Wootton suggested. And maybe there could be some middle ground here for the costs of providing a cheaper solution roundabout. So, sorry, lay-by. I've 2 questions, really, one for Highways and one for Councillor Wootton. The first question to Highways would be, would they in principle agree to a lay-by at that location? And the question to Councillor Wootton would be with his discussions with the farmer, would he in any way would he be willing to contribute to costs in any way?
Thank you for that. Okay, Karen.
Okay, the simple answer would be we'd need to look at for the funding to put an additional lay-by and where that comes from. In theory, there is no reason why we couldn't put a lay-by. The only concerns I'd have to look into the details, so that would be the caveat. But my one concern would be we have to address the ditches as well there if we're exacerbating the issue. So, there'll be a process we'll look at. But in theory, there isn't an issue. It's just the funding element and like I say, looking at the ditch issue that is impacting at the moment as well because whatever work we do, we don't want to destroy it by what's around it with the water. So yes, we can look at doing that.
Thank you for that, Karen. Ray.
Yes, thank you, Chairman. I have spoken to Mr. Elmer about this, but he sees the responsibility of the highways as LCC. He says he pays his council tax quite rightly, like we all do, and he looks to them for a solution. Now, in respect of the passing places, that was in relation to a planning application for some outdoor wigwam homes that he's got, and that was part of the application to get that through. And he paid £10,000 for those 2 parking spaces there, but he sees that it's our responsibility to provide a solution. Although I could go back to him and ask him that same question again.
Okay. Anybody else who's not spoken yet or wants to come back? Okay.
None indicated, Chairman.
Okay, fine. What I'm proposing to do is to look at the 3 things that we're expected to do. and just deal for the moment with the first two. We've considered the councillor call for action request. Okay, everybody's had a chance to contribute, officers and members. Secondly, we've now got to vote on whether to refer the councillor call for action request made by Councillor Wootton to Highways and Transport Scrutiny for them to make a final determination. If we vote in favour of that, then I'll come back and we'll come up with some words of advice to Highways. So the first decision is in principle. Do we support this councillor call for action? So I want to invite members of the board, with the exception of Councillor Wootton, to vote to determine whether or not we want to refer it on. Okay, so Nick, can you read out the name of each member present alphabetically and ask to say whether that person is for, against or abstaining on this request for a reference to Highways? Okay, over to you, Nick.
Thank you, Chairman. Councillor Mrs. Boquet.
For.
Councillor Mrs. Brockway.
For.
Councillor Kendrick.
For.
Councillor Macy.
For.
Councillor Marfleet.
For.
Councillor Mrs. Newton.
For.
Councillor Parker.
For.
Councillor Pepper.
For.
Councillor Rowe.
For.
That's unanimous, Chairman.
Thank you. So we now go on to provide some advice. I'm looking to officers particularly. But one thing that stood out was the idea, which I'd hope Nick will capture, highway scrutiny to look at problems relating to single access roads as a whole. Not just this issue, but we want them to embrace that. There was a mention of residents only access. Okay. Now, what other advice would we want to put in our note to Highways and Transport Scrutiny Committee? Anything that officers, first of all, would want to say in terms of potential solutions?
I think we can put the advice to look at the grass verge meshing, where we're protecting the verge, to look at. And then also, I believe the movement of the highway sign as requested, the section 34 highway sign. And I think you've covered the rest, if I'm honest.
Okay. Anything else that anybody else, member or officer, wants to add to our advice? Okay.
Hold on, Chairman.
No one's indicated, Chairman.
Yeah, hi. Can you hear me?
Sure, Hugo.
Sorry about that. I sort of got caught between trying to type quick enough and speaking. But yeah, I think in sense, there is quite a few different ways and ideas. I mean, Scotland has no end of people going around single roads with sort of a load of sort of different shape sizes, cars, recreation vehicles, you name it. So I think there is plenty of different ways of doing this out there. We just need to have a good look round and find out really what some solutions are cost effective. You know, and it'll be a really nice piece to see benefits, because hopefully something's going to spring out that is effective and doesn't cost like 30,000 when we're just, because at the end of the day, this could be could get worse, could get better. But once these public ways start opening up and people start using them, I think there will be a lot more people in the future going on these walks, and the nation's got behind this, and I think we're going to end up with a few more problems all over. So it really is trying to find the most cost-effective way and see what other councils and areas are doing. Thank you.
I think it's an important point, actually, to say that we want to respect both the needs of the individual farmer and at the same time not get in the way of promoting healthy exercise. And that could be a point that we could make. Okay. Do members of the committee feel that sort of advice that I just read out, Karen's added to, is adequate?
Yes.
Chairman, Councillor Boquet has requested to speak.
Thank you. Wendy.
Sorry, yeah, I'm just thinking about the cost of it that Hugo was just saying. Could it not be looked at that you don't have to do a tarmac? I know next to the road, obviously it's
Could I just ask Karen and the team whether or not what Councillor Bokett's saying is feasible and good practice?
So I suppose a couple of responses there. One is whatever we put on there, we take that maintenance liability. So we want to make sure it's future proofing really. There is a product, it is like a grass, it's like a mesh covering that you can use. You know, so you still get your grass growing through. Many people have probably seen that. We can use that on the network. Again, it's the cost element that we need to look into. But it is what it comes down to, I suppose, is the cost and the maintenance liability that we consider to make sure that that it is feasible and it's usable. And if we were to go onto private land, again, we would then take that as maintenance liability for future third-party claims, etc. But there are, you know, we could look at grass mesh in the round for this location that would stop the churning up. You're still going to get some element. I don't know if Rowan, you want to come in from your experience as the highways manager in the location and the use of like the grass mesh product.
Yeah, thanks, Karen. All I would say is there's still an element of considerable cost there. I know I keep saying about cost, but you can't just put the thing straight on the verge. You have to dig it out, put a foundation layer in to make sure it can actually hold these vehicles on it. So it's not just a case of putting the mesh itself just directly on the verge as it is. So there will be an element, but everything's feasible, but somebody's got to pay for it.
Okay, that's not our decision. We're passing the book like good scrum halves do to highways. So, and anybody else want to contribute? Because I think we've had a good debate on this.
Chairman,
okay.
I understand Sian Gibson has raised a hand. I don't know if that's a legacy hand. No, I think it's gone now.
Yeah, I just wanted to make the point that yes, we can look at potential other types of mesh and things, but again, it all comes down to the drainage in those verges. We've got many verges that are suffering simply because the ditches adjacent to them have not been maintained for many years by the landowners, and I think this is a case in point at this location. Thank you.
Fine, thank you. I think, Nick, adding drainage and ongoing maintenance and costs into our advice to highways, I think we've come up with quite a decent collection of individual contributions to provide advice to highways, and I'm sure you've got them. So are members happy that that we have been able to provide advice to highways and transport scrutiny committee?
Yes.
Yeah. Okay. Silence equals assent. Thank you, Ray, for bringing this to our attention. Thanks to officers for the advice. We've done all the things that we're expected to do, so we can move on to the next item.
That's it, thank you.
Okay, so having dealt with, excuse me a moment, item 6, I think it was, yeah, performance reporting against the corporate plan, Q2 report. Jasmine, over to you.
Thank you, Chairman. So yeah, I'll just go through the report. So this is the Q2 performance against the new corporate plan and the framework around the corporate plan. And so it's organised around the ambitions in the in the new corporate plan, and the executive will consider the report on the 2nd of February, so next Tuesday. So just inviting board really to look at the attached papers and the recommendations to the executive and decide if you support those, and if there are any additional comments that you want passed on to the executive when they consider this item. And in terms of service level performance, so that performance goes to the various scrutiny committees, and there are a couple of indicators around property that report in Q2 that are specifically in the remit of OSMB, so I've included those as well. So would ask board to review that information, see if there's any highlights or any recommendations or further actions that you want to have considered. So I think it's worth mentioning that once the corporate plan was approved and then the performance framework around that plan was approved, all of that information was then developed into a new system, a new IT system, which is now available, and the product of that is available on the County Council's website, and there's a link in the report to the corporate plan, so you can go directly and look at all of the information there. So I appreciate it's a new way of presenting that information. We did provide you an example of what that would look like when the performance framework report came. But again, if members have not had a chance to have a look or have had a chance to have a look, really welcome any feedback that you've got. And if anyone needs any assistance navigating through that, I'm very happy for people to contact me.
Okay. Do you want to pick any standouts?
Yeah, sure. So in terms of those standouts, what I've done is just organised a report around the ambitions. But I just wanted to say, actually, overall, performance is on plan. So around, again, 3 of those 4 ambitions were on plan, and we're actually ahead of plan for the everyone able to enjoy life to the full. I've mentioned in the report the percentage of activities that have achieved or ahead of plan, which is 89%, so looking really good, and something similar around the performance indicators. Maybe it's just worth mentioning some of the things around the COVID impacts for Q2, and we've got a bit of sort of further information around that. So in terms of, I think it's just worth mentioning, in terms of online transactions via the website, we've had 171,000 approximately online transactions, and that has been around the household recycling centre bookings due to COVID-19. And with excluding those bookings, there would have only been about 7,700 odd transactions. So that gives you a bit of feel for volume there. In terms of trading standards and libraries, and I've mentioned that they were not able to operate fully in terms of COVID-19, but I think it's worth mentioning that actually visitors to the castle grounds has been 230,000 visitors to those castle grounds since the first lockdown. So I think that's worth just mentioning, as residents are able to enjoy those open spaces as part of that exercise that they're allowed to do. And in terms of loaning of ebooks across the online library platform, there's been an increase of 343%. So a huge increase in people loaning ebooks. And there's also been a 453% increase on new online library joiners as well. So I think that's worth mentioning. But overall, no, it's very good performance. And I've just organised it around the various ambitions and objectives. So happy to take any questions.
Okay, questions? Nigel, Ray, any indication of anybody wants to speak?
I do.
Chairman, Councillor Belkett has.
Thank you.
indicated.
Wendy, over to you.
Thank you, Councillor Parker. Thank you, Jasmine. It is an excellent report and really interesting. And as you say, that COVID has really made an impact in most people's lives, or every life in our county. And the changes that we've actually made is incredible. As you say, people are booking in to do the waste side, the libraries. But one of the behind plans is a little bit concerning. The Sherman plan that has been out for quite a while now, so it is quite a concern that's I know it's going to be put back a little bit. The fire services are around and they're going around, so that does really surprise me that that's a behind one. I'm just wondering how we can take this forward. I mean, I chair the Help Housing Care Delivery Group. Is this something that I can bring to my group to impress on all districts to put this out in their leaflets on Twitter, on Facebook, because it is such an important thing. Fire service do go in. They're a first response. Are they? You ring 999. Somebody's fallen over, or whether it's elderly, young, or whatever. They go into that house and they can do that Sherman check, which is so important. So I'm just wondering if you think that would be an idea that we can try and improve this, or is there any way we can improve it?
I think Debbie wants to come into this as well. So really, this is around an activity rather than a performance indicator. So they were behind in terms of the numbers and volumes of people they would be able to see because of the restrictions of going into people's homes. But I'll let Debbie answer.
Yeah, Debbie, over to you.
Yeah, thank you very much. Thank you, Jasmine. Thank you, Councillor Park. And it's thank you very much for the offer of support as well. I think there's 2 things to say, which is why we're behind target in relation to this particular performance target. So the first one is that a significant number of preventative activities stopped in the early days of COVID-19 while our fire and rescue service concentrated on other things. And quite rightly, it was a risk assessment decision made, and quite rightly, they had to concentrate on supporting our vulnerable communities around COVID. And then over time, things have gone back to as normal as we possibly can, bearing in mind the restrictions. And clearly the restrictions at this moment in time are stay at home unless it is impossible to do your work from home. Clearly this is a preventative activity, and so it does require going into people's homes and doing an assessment. If people are going into homes for other reasons, then clearly they will be doing the assessment, but it's more related to the COVID restrictions that they must have due cause to go in and do the assessment. So it is directly related to COVID rather than people's willingness or desire to achieve the to achieve the target.
Brilliant. Thanks for that, Debbie. I understand it now. Thank you very much.
Okay.
I will continue to promote it then.
Great. Okay. Next question, Nigel.
I've no more requests for questions, Chairman.
Okay. Chairman, Councillor Brockway has indicated.
Right.
Thank you. Yes, thank you. Just a quick question, please, just to clarify something. Page 38.1.4.9, and it's the second bullet point. You don't really need to look at it, but it just says 59% of contacts, the customer considered their concerns have been fully addressed through achieving early resolution. Now, 59% doesn't seem very much. Does that mean that the other 41% were dissatisfied, or does it just simply mean that it took longer, perhaps, to address their concerns, that it wasn't possible to do it instantly in the first contact? Thank you ever so much.
Just bear with me. I'm just trying to find that bullet point and the reference to it.
That was on page 39, did you say?
38, 1.4.9, ambition, provide good value council services.
Sorry, it's not a technical problem.
That's right.
Is it okay if I come back to you, Jackie, on that?
Yeah.
Yeah, is that okay? Yeah, no worries. I think it'd just be simpler than holding everything up. Yeah.
Okay.
No
Can you come back to us, because it may be something that we want to refer?
Absolutely. Yeah, I'll do that. Yeah.
Okay.
Thank you.
Can I just ask a question in relation to page 43?
Yeah.
Which is the high-level ambitions about creating thriving environments, and it's broken down in good style: objective, activity, milestone, progress. Okay, here we are in January, and what we've got are two milestones that have been achieved. Okay, and it's about the question of fine. So that's achieved. Where are we now in the sense of if an objective is achieved, don't we move on to other objectives within that particular year? In other words, a tourism action plan consultation by the 30th of September sort of screams out for, well, okay, we've done the consultation. What next? Because that's a stage in a longer term means of achieving our objective. And the same thing in a sense applies to the line below: advocate for investment in our transport and energy infrastructure, etc. Sign a contract. Okay, we've signed the contract. So what?
Yeah.
And its outcomes. That there is objective, activity, milestone, progress, and I'd love to see outcomes at the end. So could you give us some indication about outcomes?
Sure. So the objectives, in a way, are the outcomes. So they're the ultimate thing that you expect to see at the end of it, that discernible difference that we're going to make. So what we've asked the services for is give us your milestones in your journey to get to that objective. And so what we've presented here is just for Q2. This is the milestone that we're going to achieve in Q2. And then for Q3 and Q4, and actually we've asked them to project up until September next year, what those other milestones are. So we will be reporting progress against those. So in Q3, which we'll be bringing to you in March, will be his progress in Q3. So just to make the report a bit more containable, we could have listed all of those milestones, but then there would be no progress against them. We've just identified the ones in that particular quarter.
Really the next steps. That's what I was particularly interested in.
Yeah, okay, no, thank you. We'll take that on board. So maybe something around what the next steps will be after that milestone to give you that sort of picture towards the journey.
Okay. Back to members. Are there any other points that you want to raise for me to bring to the attention of the executive when it meets on Tuesday?
No one indicating to speak, Chairman.
Okay, so we're satisfied with the progress made. I'm sure of that. And secondly, we have had a couple of contributions. So the recommendation is to provide the executive with information about Q2 performance against the corporate plan. If nobody's got anything else to add, then can we agree that we have done that? Is that okay with everybody? Nobody's dissenting?
Yes, Chairman, yeah.
Lovely. Okay, so that's my task for Tuesday. If we now move on to the next item on the agenda, which is item 8, the COVID report update. Members will have received that separately. And if I could hand over, excuse me, I'm just looking. Yeah, sorry, I've just not got. Yeah, Michelle Andrews. Sorry, I apologise for that fumbling there. Over to you, Michelle. Hello.
I'm not sure she's joined the meeting yet, so I'm just going to try dialing her in for you.
Okay. Hi, Michelle.
Hello, Councillor Parker, Chair. Sorry about that. I was presenting at another meeting.
Don't worry, I've just had my problem. So over to you. COVID-19 update. Looking forward to it. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. So just give you, as we agreed, we'd give you kind of an overview of the changes that has happened since we last presented in December, and anyone who's been keeping an eye on the media knows how many changes have happened since the last meeting. So obviously, to give you a little bit of an overview of that, the changes to the Christmas arrangements with regard to access to your families and the restrictions on travel that were implemented. And we also give you an overview of the other changes that happened with regard to the national lockdown that was implemented just after Christmas, and also then the closure of schools to movement to online learning as from the 5th of January, and then with the exception of vulnerable children and obviously those of key workers. Those have been the significant changes, although there have been many others. But there is the current pressure on the government to give more information about the plans out of the current national lockdown, and also what the plans are for getting all children back into school, which we know has been in the media quite significantly over the last couple of days and weeks. I've also given you an outline of the data that we have in comparison to last time. As we said, we've given you the latest data that was available to us at the time of writing the report, which was updated on the 24th of January. And if you compare that to what was available and submitted in the last report, as you can see, the Lincolnshire average per 100,000 has significantly dropped since we reported that in December, and all but 5 areas across the county have seen those drops consistently also. However, you know, as we know, those cases are still one that we need to make sure we have restrictions in place in order that we continue on that downward lead trail. We've also looked and offered you the overview of the cases in the last 7 days, and we reported in December that was 1,805, and as you can see in this paper, the Lincolnshire for overall Lincolnshire rate is 1,599. 96. So again, going in the right direction. And again, sadly, the death rate is still more than we would have wanted, but it is less than we reported in December, which was 75, and now that's reporting 66 in the last 7 days. So I hope that gives people the kind of general overview of the current situation, the changes that have happened, and kind of looking forward to how we are moving towards the mitigating measures and hopefully to a position that allows restrictions to be lifted both nationally and locally. So the vaccination programme, giving you an overview there of how the vaccination programme's being rolled out across Lincolnshire. And we did hit, I can confirm, in Lincolnshire, the first target for the set out by the government, which was all care home staff and residents for the over 65s to be vaccinated by the end of January. I think it was the 26th of January was the deadline, and we did achieve that. And obviously we are progressing well to our other cohorts, including the over 80s and some of our health and social care staff. So with regard to how we're going forward, we're working hard as a collective partnership. We want to, as a Lincolnshire Resilience Forum, we want to give all our colleagues that have worked both within the health service and our partner agencies to support them with the testing and vaccine centres that have been put up across the county. That's been a significant undertaking in the last 6 or 8 weeks or so, and we're really pleased about the way that has developed. Obviously, we are still at the early stages of that, and we do want that to increase in the volume of vaccines and tests that we're undertaking in order that we can move to reducing those, those restrictions. But we're not in that position at this stage. We are waiting for further guidance from the government about what that looks like over the next few weeks, and we will obviously make sure we provide that update in our next overview to the Scrutiny Committee. And I think I'm happy to take any questions. I'm hoping that gives you kind of a summary of where we're at. Again, the community targeted testing programmes that we've got in the county have showed a similar pattern to what we were anticipating with regard to the identification of asymptomatic people within the community, and then asking those to self-isolate in order that we can hopefully have an impact on people that are sharing the virus without those symptoms unknowingly. I'm hoping that gives you an overview, and I'm happy to take questions or feedback.
Sure. Thank you for that. I'm sure there will be some questions. Ray, who have we got on the list?
Chairman, there are nobody indicating at this point.
Okay. Could I begin with a couple of questions? In relation to the number of vaccinations that we've done, categorised by, I think it was over 80, under 80s, 80 plus, first doses, etc. Can you give us the context to how many are the target? In other words, that 22,000 under 80s and 24,000 over 80s are just figures, unless we know how many it's out of. So can you give us rough figures for how many 80 pluses we've done out of X, and how many under 80s?
The latest data I have, there's approximately 48,000 over 80s in the county. So, I mean, obviously that data I put in was on the 21st of January, and we've had another week. So the latest data I have, there's approximately 52% of over 80s in the county have been vaccinated.
Okay. My second question is a general one. Have we had any problems with getting vaccines in the right place at the right time?
There has been some individual instances of that, very isolated ones, but we have worked with our partners to overcome that and make sure that we haven't disadvantaged any individuals because of that, is my understanding. Debbie's got a hand up, so she might want to come in with that.
Thank you, Debbie.
Great, thank you, Mark, very much. It was just really to add to the earlier point that Michelle raised about the percentages of the various different groups. And as Michelle said, that the rate of the over 80s from last week, and obviously that's gone up considerably since last week again, which is really positive. I wanted really to thank our health colleagues who have been incredibly responsive on supporting our frontline services, so LCC staff and our commission services, so our care homes, our domiciliary care, our social workers who are going out and continuing to do face-to-face visits. So I got a report actually this morning to say that 78% of those frontline staff who are out and must go to work have been vaccinated, and we anticipate getting 100% or as near as to 100% as possible done by the end of the week, which I have to say is a tremendous effort from across the whole of the health and care system, and that's working with the districts as well to ensure that we get their frontline care staff. So I just really wanted to do a bit of a sort of shout out to say thank you for our health colleagues and to assure the committee that that our staff and our commission services are also been vaccinated at pace in Lincolnshire. Just in relation to the second point around vaccine availability, because we've got a high proportion of over 80s in our communities, vaccinations, apart from the very one or two specific cases that Michelle had referred to, it hasn't been an issue locally. However, I know that everybody will have been here listening to the news, and my understanding is that the pinch point around the vaccine availability comes into play in the next sort of 2 weeks. So we haven't had particular issues yet, but I think looking at the national media, I don't think we would be expecting any availability concerns at this precise moment in time. I think we're looking at a pinch point over the net in a sort of 2 week period.
Okay. Could I just ask the broader question, which is also challenging, really, is that everybody, I'm sure, individually knows of people who are not in the top 4 categories that have received vaccines, and I'm one of the people who've heard this. I'm not saying tales, because people say I've had my vaccine done, I've been vaccinated, and ostensibly on the face of it, they've got no claim within the 4 criteria that the government have laid down, but happened to be in the right place at the right time. Now, I just wondered, one of the things is about confidence, public confidence in knowing that there is a system and that we, as agents of government, as it were, who've set the priorities, are applying it. Now, that's not to say Lincolnshire is any different to Devon or anywhere else, but I just wondered what sort of explanation councillors can offer to residents who ask, how is it that, I'm not saying any names or any groups of people, but those that don't qualify under the normal conditions get a vaccine?
Shall I come in on that point, Chair, and then Michelle can add to it? So the NHS have been very clear that they will do what they call opportunistic vaccination to maximise the use of the vaccine. So rather than throw a vaccine away, which we don't want to do, we want to utilise every single possible millimetre of vaccine that we possibly can. They will do opportunistic vaccination. So if you happen to be at the GP's for another appointment, if you happen to be going to the hospital for another appointment, I certainly know of police officers, I certainly know that have been called at the end of the day, firefighters who've been called at the end of the day. So there will be absolutely opportunistic vaccinations because the NHS do not want to throw away any vaccination or any vaccine in any possible way, and they want to maximise that. So there will be people outside of the cohorts that have been vaccinated. People will hear anecdotally, and that's because they don't want to waste any vaccine. And it is about, I think, to be fair, people in the right place at the right time. I don't know if Michelle wants to add to that.
Yeah, I'm happy to answer that and add to that, sorry, Debbie, in the sense that we are obviously, that's been reported through to the strategic coordination group and the tactical coordination group, and having sitting on both of those, I just want to assure you that the priority is to use all vaccines, but absolutely maximise the opportunity for those top priority groups to get that. Obviously, with GP practices, if there are unfortunately people who've not been able to attend their appointment and there are vaccines available, they are looking at coordinating a system to ensure that where absolutely possible, those priority groups are called and been really responsive, you know, even our over 80s to coming in at the end of the day where there is an opportunity to do so. So that is being coordinated across the partnership to ensure we maximise those priority groups, but equally, as Debbie says, we don't waste a single vaccine where it's possible to administer it.
Okay, I agree with all of what you said, and I'm not going to say a but. I'm interested, though, in the selection of people for an opportunity.
My understanding is that the health colleagues are working with GPs to prioritise that and to set out hopefully a more consistent approach going forward. I think that, as Debbie said, there may have been instances in those early days of that where they've took opportunities to for staff or local people. But I think they're looking at a much more coordinated approach to that, so people feel there's confidence in the way those any surplus vaccines at the end of the day are being focused on the right people at the right time. So I do think there's more emphasis on that this week and going forward.
Okay, so when those criteria for selection for opportunism, which sounds quite a mouthful, when they're known from your health colleagues, could you let councillors know? Because it's a question that is raised to me quite often, not really often, but quite often.
I'm not confident that we'll be able to do that, Councillor Parker, because I'm not sure that the NHS would be able to articulate and ask us that question. I can certainly ask the answer, but I'm not. I'm happy to ask them.
Yeah, but I thought Michelle said that they're moving towards trying to have some sort of system rather than complete randomness. Okay, so even if that system is pretty, what you might call loose, it'd be better than randomness.
I think, sorry if I've misled you, I think that where we're trying to coordinate that is where there are health and social care staff that can respond. So we know there are frontline staff that can respond at the end of the day. They're on kind of standby, that if there are any vaccines at the end of the day, they will be responded to. So that's my understanding, that's being coordinated as best as possible. So those staff know that if there are any vaccines available within that geographical area, they would be willing to respond. So we are prioritising that to other important cohorts rather than just random members of the public, is what I was trying to say. That's how we've managed, I think, to get the health and social care staff percentage so high so quickly, is because they've been able to respond to some of those areas as well, is my understanding. But I'm happy to feed that back and see if I can get a bit more information for next month's report.
Okay, lovely. This is our, I'd say last meeting before the 15th of February deadline. Do we feel confident that Lincolnshire, the whole of the community, health and county council, will deliver on the targets set by the Prime Minister?
I'll come in, and then Michelle, who's a bit nearer, and I do just want to put a bit of a proviso on that, because talking to our colleagues in the clinical commissioning group, subject to vaccine availability, they are confident that they have got the capacity to be able to deliver the targets. I do just want to put a slight exception to that, just to make sure that people understand that, so that in terms of vaccination offered as opposed to vaccination uptake. So I'm not saying that 100% of over 80s will be vaccinated. I am saying that in terms of the target of offering a vaccine, the clinical commissioning groups are confident that, subject to vaccine availability, they are able to meet the target. Now, there will be all sorts of reasons why people would be at that moment in time unable to take up the vaccine. It could be that they're ill with COVID and therefore unable to take up the vaccine, and therefore the NHS or the clinical commissioning groups will have to go back round and re-offer some of those over 80s a vaccination. But in terms of subject to availability of the vaccine, they're confident they've got the capacity to be able to meet the target group in terms of offers of vaccinations.
Okay. In relation to that, are the CCG or another organisation looking to promote vaccination in order to achieve a higher number of not just offers but acceptances?
My understanding is we've had a really positive uptake for that, and it is only where people have had particular circumstances that they're not coming forward for the vaccine. I don't think we've had a large resistance locally to people refusing the vaccine. So where they are able to come and attend for a vaccine, even particularly our over 80s have been very happy to do that and been very flexible. And because the appointments are being done by telephone, it is very responsive in that way. So where people are not able to make it, other people are being contacted and they're responding at short notice. So not taking the opportunity if they can hasn't been a significant problem in Lincolnshire that I've been made aware of.
Okay, thank you. Right. Any more questions?
Yes, we've got four councillors requesting to speak. The first one is Councillor Jackie Brockway.
Excellent.
Chairman, my questions have already been answered. Thank you.
Thank you. The second question is from Councillor Rob Kendrick.
Rob, over to you.
Thanks, Chairman. I just want to ask several questions, although one's been partly answered, I think. Firstly, on the community testing programme, I just wanted to know, is this time limited or is this ongoing for as well, till the end of the COVID crisis? And would it be extended to other areas? I know it's targeted at the moment to like the Sinsel Bank testing place and in Boston. And my last question is relating to what's been discussed earlier about DNAs, did not attends. I understand that there's not a lot of data available from the NHS as to what percentage of people do not attend their appointments for their vaccinations. I don't know if that's been sort of updated since I last heard that a few weeks ago. Thank you, Chairman.
Thank you. Michelle.
Do you want me to come on the testing, Michelle?
I was going to say you might be more because I know it's fast paced, that isn't it?
It is. It's very fast paced and even more fast paced in terms of it changed again this morning. So the most up to date position that I can give the committee is that obviously we have had one community testing site at Sinsel Bank. That then closed and moved to St Swithin's, and there are two in Boston, one at Peter Payne and one at Haven, around those areas. We were waiting for agreement from the MHCLG that we could extend those sites. And so this morning we got agreement that we can extend until the end of March. So what we intend to do is to step back up Sinsel. Now, whether that's Friday, Saturday, Sunday or Monday, I can't confirm yet. But in the next few days, we will step back up Sinsel. Obviously, St Swithin's will continue, and then the two in Boston will continue. And they will continue for members of the public who need to go to work, and for our staff who need to go to work, as well as for early year settings, etc., that need to go to work. So we are also, as part of that funding agreement, looking to set up an additional site in Sleaford, but that would be for critical care staff of LCC and the LRF partners. I'm due to go on to a call with the district councils imminently to see whether or not they want to look at extending the testing programme. So the plan is to have 5, 4 for community testing and staff, and 1 for staff of partners of the LRF, and then to talk to the districts about whether or not they wish to extend in their areas. So I should be able to confirm that again in the next sort of week or so around what the plan is in relation to that. The second issue in relation to data, I think everybody is really wanting lots of data, and it's a bit like when the prevalence data first came out. We were desperate for data, and it almost went from a famine to a feast, didn't it, in terms of the level of data. And I think we're in a similar position for that with the vaccinations. Secretary of State Matt Hancock has promised district level data, beginning to trickle through, but I don't think it is in the currently data cleanse to the level of the ability that we would be able to share that yet. But I think it's imminent. I am expecting very soon to be able to share much more robust data sets at district level. It's just that it's not quite ready yet, Councillor Kendrick.
Thank you very much, Chairman. Thank you.
Thank you. Ray, who's next?
Councillor Wendy Bockett, Chairman.
Wendy.
Thank you. Thanks, Rob. Yeah, I've got a few issues. I mean, don't get me wrong, it's an absolute fantastic job everyone's doing across certainly across East Lindsey. I mean, both my parents have had both their jabs because they were really early on in Louth. But Skegness does concern me slightly that we're not getting the numbers through when there are vacant appointments. And the NHS site, the booking site that pharmacists use, doctors use, health workers use to book themselves on, has been made public twice so far on Facebook. And people have been going on booking randomly, which is again is a worry. And the other thing that I'm concerned about is the number, the 119 number. We're getting lots of reports from elderly people who are trying to ring, and I know, don't get me wrong, I know it's really busy and I understand that, but when they're saying, oh, there's no appointments for them, if they're very elderly, it's very confusing for them. I mean, my dad's 87, he couldn't have done that on his own, and they're getting told ring their GPs. Well, both our GP surgeries are not involved with this on the coast, Beacon and Hawthorne. So you're getting an elderly person ring the doctors up and they're saying, no, it's nothing to do with us. No way. That isn't the answer that we want. You know, the doctors need, I know they don't want to get involved, they're too busy, but they need a stance to say, look, keep trying the number or do ring us back if you really are having trouble, because, you know, they are elderly and if they've got no family, it really is a concern to me. So, I mean, other than that, everything's working fantastic. I mean, Spilsby's, you know, they're on the over 70s now. It's fantastic work what they're doing in Spilsby for around the country. But it's the number, and certainly on this coast, that the doctors are not replying correctly. And if someone's missed an appointment, like somebody's just said, and they're 87 or 86, and they're just getting no response, you know, we just need somewhere where else they can go. Thank you.
Thank you. Any comments, Michelle or Debbie?
Well, I think Michelle wants to bring that back to the cell. I'm not sure if Michelle managed to catch the GP surgeries in specific, so it might be useful just to clarify that. But I know Michelle will want to bring all of that back to to our partners, won't you, Michelle?
Yeah, I'm happy to report that back through the tactical cells, and I'm involved in those. So I'll make sure that's reported this afternoon, and that can be picked up, and make sure it isn't just an isolated incident. I do know that, you know, as you say, some over 80s have found the booking system a bit challenging and sometimes not completed it fully, but have gone for an appointment, assuming no over 80s that have gone for a vaccination where their application, if you like, hasn't been fully completed, have been turned away. So they have been still vaccinating those. But I do understand that if the communication isn't consistent across all partners, that causes more confusion. And the Facebook element, I'll look into that as well. My understanding is, though, when you go for your vaccination, you do need to have produced your NHS number so they can verify that you're eligible. So again, I'll make sure that system, that issue is reported so they can tighten that system if that's been the case in some areas.
I just think it's just a bit of a crazy system when they're giving it out to, and I know they've given it out to a pharmacy because my friend works at the pharmacy and she's booked her appointment online. And to me, that, you know, why we're doing pharmacies who are working behind screens, I don't know. That's up to the government. They decide that. But surely, you know, police officers to me are more important, or social care or whatever, more than a pharmacy that's behind a screen. It's a crazy system in that respect. But no, I will, and I'll email you the 2 surgeries on it as well, because it is just a concern that their lack of help is just unbelievable.
Okay, I'll definitely follow that up for you.
Thank you.
Thank you. Ray, any next person?
Yes, the last speaker, Chairman, is Councillor Nigel Pepper.
Thank you, Nigel.
Yeah, thank you, Chairman. May just got out of the sync a little bit now, but when you was mentioning about people seem to having these vaccination at random, it's sometimes, I mean, there's always going to be anomalies, and sometimes what appear anomalies are not. For instance, there was a girl in my community, she was active on Facebook, and she's barely 18, saying she'd had the vaccine, but it was only when you drilled down and found out that she actually works in a care home, and that's how she come to have it. I mean, I've had my vaccine, and me elderly 95-year-old aunt hasn't. That don't seem right, but I've had mine because I'm still active as a funeral director, and funeral directors come under the same category as health workers. My 95-year-old aunt lives out in the sticks. She's immobile, so somebody's actually got to come to hers to give her the vaccination. So there's always going to appear to what be an anomalous, Mr. Chairman.
Fine, that's a decent point. Okay. Anyone else? Ray, do you want to speak?
No, thank you very much, Chairman.
Okay.
No more speakers.
2 things. The first one, I just wanted to ask about next time we have a report. The information that we've been given is bang up to date, and we discussed that as to delaying the issue of the paper so that we could have an up-to-date report. But sometimes it would be good, well, quite often it would be good if we had details of the last set of figures that you produced to do an immediate contrast. The example that I'm thinking of relates sadly to deaths, because East Lindsey has by far and away the highest number of deaths, nearly twice as much as any other district. But I think a lot of those deaths were historic. And East Lindsey's death rate is now, should we say, average compared to other shire districts. But it wouldn't be bad if we could have the last set of figures just to see how it's gone, because you made a number of contrasts when you said, by contrast, last time I produced the report, it was. And it'd be good if it was in the paper. That's all I wanted to say. Okay. But
I'll take that on board. Yeah.
Yeah, lovely. Thank you. The one thing that I'd like us to finish on is for all of us on Overview and Scrutiny Management Board to agree that we want to thank everybody involved in producing not only the report, but the delivery of the services behind the report. And Debbie, if you could feel as though you could express that, the Overview and Scrutiny Management Board belief essentially that we wanted to acknowledge not only the hard work but the dedication of everybody involved in the County Council and the CCG in tackling our problems in Lincolnshire.
It would be a pleasure, thank you.
Thank you. Okay, that's it. The Overview and Scrutiny Management Board was invited to consider the report and provide feedback. We've done that. People are happy with that, I guess. Yeah.
Yes.
Silence is dissent. It's not dissent. Thank you. If we move on, thank you, Michelle. Thank you.
Thank you.
If we move on to the next item, which relates to our own piece of work when it comes to the budget, this is the service revenue and capital budget proposals in relation to an OSMB, which involves commercial resources and corporate services. Keith Hoyland, Head of Finance Communities, is going to present the report. So this is item 9. Over to you, Keith.
Good morning. As the Chairman said, this report presents the budget proposals for the next financial year for commercial resources and corporate services. On pages 55 and 56 of the pack, I provided some of the context in terms of the 2020 spending review and local government settlement, but I won't go through that as it's covered in more detail in the next agenda item. Other than to say that due to continued uncertainty in the funding position for future years, we are again presenting budget proposals for a single year. The proposed revenue budgets for commercial resources and corporate are presented in Table A on page 58. The table shows the movements from the current year's budgets in terms of pay inflation, cost pressures and savings. Given the expectation of public sector pay restraint, the £245,000 that you see is allowed for pay inflation is effectively just the budgets catching up with the higher than budgeted pay award for the current year. No further pay inflation has been allowed for in 21-22. There are, however, a number of unavoidable increases to proposed budgets to address other cost pressures that are offset to varying degrees by savings. They're detailed in paragraphs 112 to 120 of the report, but I'll just pick out the larger movements. So looking firstly at commercial, in IMT, there's increased demands for supporting agile working and contractual inflation, which creates a cost pressure of 477,000. Increases in rates, insurance, contract inflation, compliance costs for corporate property result in a cost of 713,000.
You're breaking up a bit. Please. Wanted to just know. Sorry to interrupt. It's not coming across too clearly.
Sorry, I've got a rather flaky connection today, so I'll turn my camera off. So hopefully that will improve the quality. Just to repeat the point on corporate property, there's a cost pressure totaling 713,000, which results from increases in utility costs, rates, insurance, contract inflation, and increased compliance costs. But that's largely offset by reduced rent payable from the county farms estate. In the customer service centre, there's a cost pressure of 130,000 due to increased volumes and contract inflation. In resources, most of the movements are relatively small, except for finance, where we've got revised volumes and contract inflation in the outsourced services, creating a cost pressure of 275,000, and a further pressure of 273,000 arising from new requirements for the processing of social care payments. The changes in corporate budgets are all relatively small, so I won't detail those. I think that covers the most significant movements in terms of revenue budgets. It is important to stress that during the current year, a number of services have been significantly impacted by the coronavirus pandemic. The increases in costs and losses of income that have resulted have been funded by a government grant. And these proposed budgets for 2021-22 are based on the assumption that any continuing impacts will similarly be fully grant funded. Moving on to capital budgets. Table B on page 61 sets out the proposed capital programme. Other than some rephasing of expenditure for existing projects, there have been no changes to the previously approved capital programme for these services. So hopefully that summarises the main points of the report, Chairman.
Okay. Nigel, Ray, any speakers?
Chairman, I've got Councillor Hugo Markley requesting to speak.
Lovely. Hugo, over to you. You're on mute, Hugo.
Sorry about that, I double clicked it. I don't know whether it's in relation to this item or the next item, but extra care housing seems to have disappeared completely off the radar. I know it's technically in effect, we haven't got it allocated until we have a site to in effect go for another site, should I say, because we are progressing very well with our extra care housing at the current time, with 2 new schemes coming on board, and it is and it really is a great asset to the world of adults, but it seems to be not mentioned at all in the capital programme.
Yeah, the capital programme I've presented there is just for commercial and resources, the 2 extra care housing projects appear in the adult care part of the programme. It is covered in the total programme that's presented in the next paper, but Derwent Court and Limelands are both still in the adult care community programme.
Okay, that's fine. And then going forward, let's say we found a site, say this year or next financial year, is there anything that'll be next agenda item?
Yes, it will. So it's a very good question for the next item. Yeah, that's it. Going forward.
Yeah.
Okay.
Thank you.
Ray, any next question?
No further speakers, Chairman.
Okay. Could I just ask? Excuse me, Keith. You know, on page 58 and 59, 58 has the revenue budget, and it's broken down into commercial resources and corporate. And when we look across to resources, there are 4 points there, and I couldn't see one in relation to what looks like savings of 1,099,000 in legal services, which is in red on page 58. Could you just say a word or two about that?
Yeah, it's not savings as such. Legal services, because it's providing services effectively for fees as an income target. So it has a net negative budget. It has a net income target rather than cost. So that's unchanged from the current year, with the same target carrying forward.
Right. I follow the general argument. Yeah. Don't legal services then expect to expand and bring in more revenue?
There's no assumption in the budget of any expansion or increase in income.
Okay, why is that?
Chairman, could I come in as the responsible director, please? Is that
yeah, sure, of course.
Yeah. So there isn't. You're right. There's no anticipation in increased income this year, but we are looking at it in future years, and there are obviously a lot of the income is external from external partners as well, because we're in the partnership with West Lindsey, North Kesteven, Boston and East Lindsey, but we're also looking at further expanding that partnership, which would bring in a further chargeable income. Clearly as well, we've brought the alternative business structure paper through this committee previously also, and naturally we'll start to look to motor with that this year as well, and we anticipate that will bring in further income ultimately to the council in the form of a dividend from that company, but in line with prudent budget setting, and naturally we where possible we'd only seek to bring in income where we know it's guaranteed, rather than putting in speculative income figures in a budget. It's the best way to do it, and naturally given the overall corporate position, which we'll talk about in the next section, we're in the fortunate position of being able to do that as well. So that's why, by way of explanation, Chair.
Okay. Right. Anybody else in the meantime put their hand up to speak?
No further questions, Chairman.
Okay. So if that's the case, members of OSMB are asked to consider the report. We've done that. We've made comments on the budget proposals. Yeah. And therefore, these will be considered by the executive at its meeting on the 2nd of February. Is that agreed?
Agreed.
Agreed, yes.
Any dissent?
None showing, Chairman.
Okay, so I have formally proposed this, but I just wanted to be clear that if anybody wants to disagree, can you show up on the chat line? No, so no. We can assume that is agreed. Lovely, thank you. I'm not going to say the main item, but certainly the most substantive and one of the important issues that we have to do is to consider the council budget in its entirety for 2021-22. We've got a range of officers here available to answer questions, but can I begin by inviting Michelle Grady, Assistant Director of Strategic Finance, to present the report? Thank you. Michelle, over to you.
Thank you very much, Chairman. As you've said, I'll present the report. I do have some members of the finance team with me that can help with some of the questions. Pam is the Head of Finance for Adult Social Care and Community Wellbeing, certainly be able to help with the question about the extra care housing capital schemes. Got Mark from Education and Children's Services, Sue's here from the corporate point of view, and Keith obviously here from communities. So as the Chairman said, the report is looking at the 5th of January proposals and asking you to give feedback on those proposals before Executive make their final recommendations to Council on the 2nd of February. You'll probably note that the report for the 2nd of February Executive's already been published, and not really any different to the report that's been issued for the 5th of January. And this is mainly because the primary purpose of that will be to consider consultation feedback from Scrutiny and from the public, to consider any issues raised through the Equality Impact Assessment, and to look at any up-to-date financial information that we'll have. We're still waiting for quite a lot of that, so we will need to virtually table quite a lot of that information. So the Scrutiny comments from today, and we've got a business consultation meeting this afternoon, and we're still waiting for quite a bit of information from the district councils. They're required to provide us details of their business rate assumptions. They've got until the 31st of January to do that. In most years, it might not have a massive impact on our overall financial position, but we're expecting this year that it might do. So not going to be able to give a final position to Executive until the 2nd of February. Keith's very kindly not stolen any of my thunder, so I'll go through some of the key points to do with the settlement and the spending review that was announced by government last year. So we was expecting to have reform of local government finances. That again has been deferred for at least another year to allow the focus to be on the COVID response, quite understandably. So we've been given a 1-year rollover settlement as we was last year. So quite difficult to do long-term planning when our funding announcements are really short-term. Part of the announcements that were made before Christmas was that our council tax referendum limits will be 2% for general increases and an additional 3% allowable for an adult social care precept, with the opportunity to defer that for a year if that was deemed to be appropriate. We also got some announcements of a new social care grant, 300 million added nationally, and our share of that was 5.3 million, which was slightly more than we was expecting. And also the government announced ongoing support for COVID cost pressures and COVID impacts. So a new scheme, council tax reduction scheme grant, recognising that there'll be a much bigger uptake in council tax reduction schemes which are funded locally. So an extra 5.3 million awarded to us for that. And also COVID pressures being funded through the general grant of an additional 15 million for grant purposes into 21-22. In terms of our medium-term position, the report sets out the view of our financial position for the next 3 years. As I've said, we've still got quite a lot of uncertainty in there. The announcements that were made before Christmas has meant that we're forecasting to have a slight surplus position for the current, for 21-22. Again, that's very much provisional at the moment, very much waiting for those final figures to come back from the district councils on the business rates and council tax impacts on our position. We still do have a shortfall in years 2 and 3 following that, and obviously we'll need to look at how we meet those shortfalls as we go into the new year. So the provisional position is set out in paragraph 114 of your report on page 72. So just looking at the overall revenue budget details for 21-22, as Keith has said, due to the uncertainty, we're only setting detailed budgets for next year, for 1 year. The details of the cost pressures and savings are in Appendix B, so they're fully detailed in your report pack on page 89. Just some key highlights there, though.
The cost pressures, including pay inflation that we've had to fund this year, are just short of 27 million, with some large areas of cost pressures being in adult care and community wellbeing, relating to price inflation, national living wage increases, and some demand in the working age adult areas, being a large part of that pressure. Also some considerable pressures in children's social care around the children in care costs, increasing complexity of needs of that group being intensified by the situation with COVID, and also some cost pressures around home to school transport, both on demand and inflationary costs around national living wage. We've also got some cost pressures on our waste contract, new contract for mixed dry recycling, cost pressure there of about £1 million, and some pressures on our other budgets. So lump sum pension, lump sum we have to make to the local government pension scheme, cost pressure there of 1.3 million, and reduced investment interest of 1.4 million. In terms of savings, we've highlighted just under £14 million worth of savings. Most of that is actually additional income, but also got some slippage there in terms of a one-off saving on the capital financing costs that we've been able to build in, and some efficiency savings in there as well for things like printing and changing in asphalt contracts for gritters for highways. There are no service reductions proposed in these budgets. Page 75, Table B, sets out the whole of the service budgets that we're proposing. In terms of council tax proposals, I've just set out what the referendum limits are. So there was a 2% limit on general increases and 3% for adult social care precepts. Our proposal, or the proposal that's being made to council, will be for a 1.99% general increase and not to apply the adult social care precept in 21-22. The 1.99% will generate just over £6 million worth of income for us before looking at any growth in tax base. The financial risks are set out in the report on page 78, with the key ones for us being really about the ongoing impacts of COVID. So we haven't made any assumptions about needing to fund any pressures for COVID into the new year, because by and large they've been covered by government grants up to now, but clearly we don't know what the longer term impacts are going to be, and also the impact on the collection by the district councils of council tax income and business rates income, a massive risk for us at the moment. In terms of proposed use of earmark reserves, as we stand at the moment, we're not proposing to use any earmark reserves for the current year to balance our position, but clearly that will depend massively on what information comes back from the district councils. We currently have just over 52 million in our financial volatility reserve, which will be our first port of call if we do need to draw down to balance the budget for 21-22. In terms of the capital programme, the gross spend for 21-22 is proposed to be 204 million, and that meets with our capital strategy in terms of affordability. The key changes to the capital programme are set out from page 79 in the report, but I'll just highlight a couple. So we've increased the gross programme for the building communities of specialist provision around our special school provision, and that's increased to 86.7 million, but a lot of that increase being met from additional government grants. We've also had to increase the budgets on the Lincoln Eastern Bypass and Grantham Southern Relief Roads to reflect current forecasts, and the additional costs there are being offset by pushing back uncommitted budgets from 21-22 into future years on the lines for the Boston development schemes and the coastal pinch point coastal routes. We've also included in the programme a new project for the paper and card rollout to do with waste collection, and also in our capital programme we have now got the North Highcombe Relief Road LCC contribution. Obviously, as part of the settlement announcements, the DFT announced their support for with £110 million worth of grant for North Highcombe Relief Road, and officers are working through that now in terms of a spend profile. And the full detail of the capital programme is in Appendix C. So I'm going to stop there, and I will hand over to any questions. Unless do you want us to pick up question about the extra care housing first, Chairman? Would that be helpful?
Be good. Hugo, do you want to ask the question again in an expansive way, because you've had a first part to it, and then so I'll leave it to you to ask it two-part question.
Well, in essence, we'll go, so the extra care housing, there's two parts. One, there is what we are already scheduled for doing now, which is being implemented on the two current schemes. And then I believe that we had a chunk of money set aside to expand the extra care housing offer. It is obviously reliant on the appropriate area or scheme or land coming forward to meet our criteria, but there is nothing on the sort of capital programme for that, and just wondering what the plan is.
So they'll go into the programme in detail as and when those schemes are agreed, but I'll just let Pam come in if that's okay. Councillor Marfleet, just give you the details of what we've got in our grants at the moment to support that programme.
Okay.
Good morning, everybody. Morning, Councillor Marfleet. Yes, we do. On page 111 of the report, we've got the Linelands and the Nettleham extra care housing development noted, which have gone through our processes. In addition to that, we have just short of £10 million that is planned out beyond 2022 for the following 2 years to cover the proposals that we are putting together, as you rightly say, dependent on the land and the location that we need. Our entire capital programme is 12.7 for adult social care, and that is committed to extra care housing, stroke maximising independence, depending on the age group we're looking at. I think Exec are due to receive the next development in February, which is adult care scrutiny signed off in January with the recommendations. And once that happens, we will then feed that into the capital programme, and you'll see it in these reports.
Right, excellent. And the sort of, as you say, the sort of just under the 10 million that we have forecasted, well, allocated in effect, that just because it's a 1 year budget, the chances of anything happening next year, is that the reason why it's not actually listed at all?
It is, and also until it's gone through the full process, Councillor Marfleet, around actually getting the agreement and the business case and everything approved. At that point, once it's signed off, then it goes into papers like these. But the financial allocation remains within AC, adult social care, allocated to extra care housing.
Okay, thank you for that.
Thank you. Ray, next question.
No more speakers, Chairman.
Okay. I appreciate that nearly all of the members here are chairs of Scrutiny Committee, so I presume that you've had the opportunity to look at the budget in your own committee and had a discussion. If you have a reflection and if you think of anything, in the meantime, I've just got a couple of questions. If I could just make it clear that I intend to abstain on this paper because as leader of the Labour group, I will have a few things to say at the full council meeting, and I don't want to compromise anything by at this meeting. So if I could begin, we're not taking the adult social care premium opportunity of up to 3%. Could you just, am I right in thinking that 1% of council tax equals 1.9 million? So is it fair to say that we could have taken 3% on the adult care premium, and that would have been roughly 5.7 million? Is that right?
So 1% on our council tax is just over 3 million. So 1%,
3 million,
just over 3 million. Yeah, in terms of additional income to us. So the 1.99% we're proposing for the general council tax will generate just over 6 million in additional income for us. So each 1% represents just over 3 million.
Sorry, I apologise. If we would have increased our social care premium by 1%, 2% or 3%, how much would that have brought us in?
Well, for every 1%, it would have generated an extra 3 million, just over 3 million income. Yeah.
Okay. And you confirm that we have £62 million in the financial volatility?
52.
52.
5-2, yes.
Right. Okay. And just moving to the capital programme, I see that that we are suspending or reducing work on other schemes because of overruns on schemes that have been either completed or are in progress. The Lincoln Eastern Bypass and the Grantham Southern Relief Road. Can you just, for the record, say how much that is and what impact it will have on any specific schemes?
So we had 2 lines in the capital programme for Boston development schemes, which had a total programme of about 5.5 million. And Keith might need to just come back in with the exact numbers for the other. So there was a line for the coastal pinch points as well. There was an element of those budgets that had been forecast to be spent in 21-22, but as it stood when we set the budgets, they were not committed. So there was no schemes earmarked to be used. You'll understand that we have the continual problem of underspending capital financing charges because of money in the budget that's maybe not committed and doesn't spend to profile. So it seemed prudent at that time to push that uncommitted spend back into future years and bring forward some of the extra costs on the LEB and Grantham, basically to kind of just try and smooth out the profile of our capital financing. Is it okay if Keith comes in and just gives you some of the detail of the numbers on that?
Thank you. That's really useful.
Yeah, probably the 1 million in terms of what's been deferred into the future. But I'll say that was funds that were allocated to a programme of activity, but for which there weren't specific projects already in train. So it isn't actually affecting any live projects, and it's deferring activity on the Boston development and coastal highways into the future.
Okay, so sorry, if I could just ask another one in relation to Boston. I'm not sure in detail, but when you say it's pushing it into the future, could you just say why it's not having an impact now if we're pushing something into the future? If we the
total programme for Boston was around about 5.5 million, and somewhere around 1.7 million has effectively been deferred into the future. So there is still a good portion of activity ongoing, which is the live projects for which schemes have been agreed. And it was always seen as a longer term programme. So activity will continue into the new year on that, although there is no new allocation of money in the new year.
Okay.
The main impact, Councillor Parker, is usually on our capital financing charges, which is why we've smoothed the programme out a little. And you'll be aware we've got a reserve to try and help smooth those costs as well. So we've just juggled around the years effectively to try and help with the capital financing.
I understand that. And my final question really relates to that we have a budget from last year. We look for savings, which and we look for pressures. Okay. And we then find the money. I'm being very simple about that. The point I wanted to make, though, is that could we identify any new developments, services that we've not delivered, and that we can say that this isn't a standstill budget, but it's developing services across the whole of the adult social care, children's, highways, economic development, etc.
I can probably start to answer that, but Andrew and Debbie might want to come in as well. But my point would be is that council last year, we put a significant amount of money aside for development, and a large part of that was about our transformation programme. So there's quite a lot of work going on at the moment about how we deliver our services and how that's best for the residents of Lincolnshire, and that was already in our budget. So we budgeted for that in terms of when we set the budget last year, and when we looked at the out-term report for last year as well, we pushed together another 7 million to support that programme of work. So it's not new in our budget at the moment, but that transformation programme is really starting to kick off now, and providing that development in terms of the services we deliver.
Yeah, that's very true about last year. I wanted to restrict and draw a line on the 31st of March and the 1st of April. But you said, Debbie, Andrew may be able to say something. Debbie, do you want to say anything, Andrew?
Let Andrew come in first.
Yeah, no, happy to add to what Michelle said, really, Chair. So I think you'd appreciate, given some of the papers that we've brought through this committee over the past year or so, really, around developments on the corporate plan and the transformation programme, etc. There is a lot of activity going on, mobilising those, starting to deliver those items. Clearly we'll have an aspiration to, look at how we develop those items in the corporate plan, and that over a period of time. Remember, it's a 10-year plan. We'll naturally see levels of investment change in some of those activities over that period of time. But also, as well as Michelle said, and in reference to your question, Councillor Parker, about children's and adult services, the big programme around how we manage future demand, particularly in a post-COVID world at the moment, with which we don't know actually how that world is going to look yet. Naturally, COVID's going to have a massive impact on some of those, particularly the care markets that we operate in, and therefore the timing of this budget is, in some respects, is to act as a bridge to what that future world may look like. So, as the numbers show, we're in a strong position financially, the balance sheet is strong as well, and the proposals that are outlined at the moment demonstrate an almost balanced position as it stands at the moment. So it's a strong set of budget proposals.
Okay, Debbie, do you want to add anything?
Thank you very much. No, I haven't got anything to add from what Andrew said.
Okay, can I come back on that point, in the sense of all of us being councillors and answerable to the people that we represent, but with a 1.9% increase in the council tax, what can we say essentially about more and better services in relation to this budget? Now, that isn't a political question; it's a fundamentally numbers question. Are we spending more on different things than we will be doing from the 1st of April onwards?
Well, I think I'd point to the figures outlined in Appendix B, I think it is. Michelle will nod otherwise, about the amount of cost pressures that we have to fill this year. I don't think there is any such thing as a standstill budget, not least because of the amount of pressures that we face. You'll see across the adults and the children's proposals in particular, acute figures of demand that we're having to manage in those areas, whether that's across the adult care demand, looked after children numbers, home to school transport. All of these are very key services that our residents value, and they don't just cost the same year on year. And in an era where our government grant figures are either frozen, as they have been this year, or have been reducing in previous years, council tax is the only place really, other than savings, that we can go to meet the rising costs of those valued services. So that would be my response from a numbers perspective. But there is obviously also a political dimension to increasing the council tax.
Yeah, that's not the part of the politics is for full council. Okay. While those questions have been asked, has anybody else indicated that they want to speak?
I've got Councillor Rob Kendrick who wishes to speak.
Lovely. Councillor Kendrick. Rob.
Thanks, Rob. Yeah, I mean, as you say, we've all looked at this in our respective scrutiny committees, and the one area that exercised our mind, somewhat children and young people, was home to school transport. But there is going to be, or currently undertaking, an in-depth review on home to school transport, because it is such a big issue and such a big budget for that. So that was reassuring to hear that actually in our particular meeting, that there's an in-depth review going on into home to school transport. But that's the only comment I wish to make, Chairman. Thanks very much.
Fine. Okay, thanks. Can I just ask you though, because we have scrutiny groups, don't we, set up to look at in-depth things, I just wondered how your review is tackled. Is it going to be basically an officer review with some member involvement rather than consideration for a scrutiny review?
I understand it's an external review, but perhaps officers can give a bit further information on that one.
Okay, definitely. I don't go into it in detail because it's not part of the budget, but...
I'm happy to provide a bit of context. So homeschool transport is one of the programmes within the transformation programme. We recognise that it is a significant cost pressure, and we're anxious about the position of the market, and so want to look at how the home to school transport, as well as the sort of transport network and the concessionary fares, can better dovetail together, how we can commission better, how we can support the market better, so that we can actually try and look at improving the provision that's provided, as well as improving the sort of efficiency of it. So it is an expert consultant that we've got who've done a lot of work in terms of logistics and working with councils around commissioning of homeschool and concessionary transport. They've come in as experts and they're working with us to come up with a series of recommendations. We need to do some work, and I think and agree, because it's cross-cutting between transport and highways and children's. So we need to talk about how we can share the findings of that review across the two committees, because obviously both of the committees will both be interested in learning what the outcome of those findings are. It may be when those findings and those recommendations goes to those committees that there's particular issues that the committee want to look at in more detail in terms of a scrutiny review. But my recommendation to you would be to receive the report and then consider that suggestion then.
Sure. Okay. Thank you. Any more questions, Ray?
No more speakers, Chairman.
Okay. So we've got before us a proposal, which is on, page 67, that the executive approves the proposals. Right. Sorry, that's the one going to the executive. We're offering our contribution comments, and I guess it's fair to say that we are in favour of the recommendation, and that we want to bring to the attention of the executive certain key thoughts. So we're asked to consider the report and make comments. And there was the one from Hugo in relation to the development of extra care accommodation. I raised a couple of points in particular in relation to council tax and the impact. And then finally, there was the question of homeschool transport and the review that's taking place, which I'm sure that we welcome. Okay, we do have to vote on this. So to consider the report, simple as that. We've got to vote in favour. So over to Nigel.
Chairman, if you want to invite, if there's any dissent, if councillors could show that in the chat.
Okay.
And then we can take it.
I'd like my abstention recording. Okay.
Nothing mentioned, Chairman.
Okay.
Okay. Councillor Newton is also abstaining.
Thank you. Yeah. Okay. So the views of the board will be reported to the executive, and I'll do that on your behalf on the 2nd of February. Okay.
Thank you, Chairman.
Thank you. That concludes the business with the exception of the items for information only. I note that the programme for the coming few months is predicated on an election taking place in May. So I just want to bring to people's attention that the fact that, excuse me, speaking briefly about it, there was a meeting in the County Council's network yesterday, all parties. Robin Gendrick, the Secretary of State for Department of Local Government, was present. He said that discussions with leading members of the County Council's network and other political groups on, for example, the Association of District Councils and the Metropolitans, had indicated broad support for cancellation. He put his views to the Prime Minister. So too the medical views had been put forward to the Prime Minister, and that would taken place, I think, a fortnight ago, and a decision was expected within a week, and nothing as yet has happened. But it does mean that if there is a postponement or a delay, that the programme for our activities, which, for example, in June is an introduction to service areas reporting as part of the induction programme, will have to be refreshed. So just make that point for information. But thanks for everybody's attendance, and see you soon. Thanks.
Thank you, Chairman.
Thank you, Chairman.